Hey pups, RP here. Ever since I was a kid, shows like Rugrats, ScoobyDoo, and Pokemon have been my favorite cartoons and shows growing up. And since the 2020 years have begun, and since I've been on a nostalgia craze lately, I decided to create my list of the top 30 nostalgic shows and cartoons. But before we do, I have to go over those pesky and boring rules again. Rule number 1, I'll only be counting shows that I grew up with and have watched over the years under the age of 21. So I'm afraid shows like The Loud House or Steven Universe, seeing as I'd just gotten into the show Steven Universe a few months into my high school graduation, and shows on Adult Swim will be counted for due to them being targeted as adults. I'm focusing on shows only targeted at the age range from preschoolers to teens for this list. Rule number 2, speaking of adults, people such as Dan Schneider, while being found to be an absolute creep, will not be mentioned for their incidents on this list because I like to separate the art from the artist here. Similar to saying how Sean Skimmel is an amazing voice actor for characters like Goku and Lucario, but is an absolute asshat. Rule number 3, reboots like Teen Titans Go, Blue's Clues and You, and the Powerpuff Girls 2016 reboot will not be accounted for on this list because, well, they're reboots. 2 out of 3 of said reboots are absolutely terrible, and again, they're still reboots to the original classics. And movies such as the Rugrats movie or the Hey Arnold movie won't be counted for either. Be it featured films in theaters or movies aired on TV, they're still films, and I want to solely focus on TV shows and cartoons only, meaning TV episodes alone. Rule number 4, anime such as Black Butler, Soul Eater, and Dragon Ball Super won't be counted for either, since they're made for an older audience as well. But there's an exception to this rule. I will count animes made for kids like Hamtaro, and of course, the classic Pokemon anime. And spin-offs like Baby Looney Tunes and Tiny Toon Adventures may or may not be counted separately on this list. And finally, rule number 5. Whether they're made for preschool programming like Nick Jr., they still share a network with the same channel like Nick Jr. and Nickelodeon. I'll also count VHS shows and cartoons as well, since, again, that's what I grew up with as a kid. I'll also count shows from other channels such as Kids WB, PBS Kids, Cartoon Network, and plenty more. And yes, I will include shows that are still running to this day, at the time I'm scripting this, like Arthur and SpongeBob SquarePants. Now, without further ado, let us go on the nostalgia train, because this list is about to begin, and it's probably going to be a long one. Looney Tunes. I know what you're thinking. How is Looney Tunes a nostalgic cartoon for me? Well, if my parents were able to afford cable and a TV, Looney Tunes was on air. I think my favorite segments of the Looney Tunes franchise were the episodes involving Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. As a kid, I've always wondered why Wile E. never caught him, but that was the main part of the cartoon. Either that or he was a metaphor for trying to reach our goals in life. Still, Looney Tunes has held a special place in my heart to this very day. Kimba the White Lion. I'm mostly focusing on the 90s dub of the classic anime about a white lion cub protecting his friends and the entire jungle as a whole. Believe it or not, Kimba was my first real anime as a kid. Well, sorta. It still counts. I had a few of the VHS tapes as a kid, and would watch them religiously. Plus, Kimba was super cute. And pretty much the main inspiration for the popular Disney movie The Lion King. I even bought a few DVDs of Kimba, and nowadays, it's actually pretty hard to find merchandise for it. So Kimba merch is pretty much a rarity. But hey, at least the DVDs aren't. Kind of. Courage the Cowardly Dog. Even as a kid, I was always a major scaredy cat. But Courage was a character I could relate to whenever I'd watch the show. Even the show itself was meant to be scary. The cartoon shared the message of what true bravery is, doing the things you're afraid to do, and not being a blundering fool like Eustace. Honestly, it was one of those shows anyone can relate to, young or old. Knowing the real definition of courage is what Courage the Cowardly Dog is. He isn't just a scared little pupper, he's an actual brave and kind-hearted canine. ScoobyDoo. Like I said earlier, I was a scaredy cat, and was often told that I hated scary things growing up. But Scooby-Doo is a classic, and Courage isn't the only doggo on this list. If Scooby and Courage taught me anything as a kid, is that bravery is doing what you're afraid to do. That aside, being the biggest dog person I know, Scooby-Doo was not only super cute, it was also super funny too. Plus, the show is what got me involved in the mystery genre, and what got me into being a major Nancy Drew fangirl. And when Zombie Island came out, that made me into a major monster fangirl in adulthood, and a massive zombie fanatic as well. Scooby-Doo pretty much played a big part of my childhood alongside Pokemon and many other shows. And the spin-off A Pup Named Scooby-Doo was one of my absolute favorites as a child. I adore the puppy version of Scooby, and the character-viewer interactions the characters had, kind of like a bit of a fourth wall break, but it also reminded me of shows like Blue's Clues, where the character interacts with the viewer. Scooby-Doo will always catch that villain. SpongeBob SquarePants. You probably saw this coming on this list. I remember seeing the pilot airing on Nick when I was about 3. So happy 20th anniversary, SpongeBob, at the time I'm scripting this. Also, RIP Mr. Hillingberg. You made every day the best day ever. I'd also like to put this entry in the memory of my father. His favorite character was Patrick, and was basically the embodiment of the character. And nothing or no one will ever replace my big goofball dad. I love you and I miss you, Dad. SpongeBob was an extremely popular cartoon within my family. While I was the only one who didn't really get into things like Star Wars, like my aunt and father were, we all shared a huge love for SpongeBob. And I mean the entire family. My grandparents, my parents, other relatives, everyone, and a lot of my friends. Any references we made in the past, or now, are all related to the sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea. And honestly, SpongeBob has gotten a little bit better now without John K. writing the episodes, and rewriting the characters into his versions of Ren and Stimpy, if they were SpongeBob characters. While I haven't watched too many new episodes, SpongeBob always holds a special place in my heart no matter what, and even more so since my father passed away, and we shared a love of Pokemon and SpongeBob. So yeah, I really miss my father, and some of the greatest memories of him I have involved the two things we love the most, and of course, the love we had for each other. I love you, Dad. This one's for you. Arthur. I never really was a huge bookworm as a kid, but shows based off of kids' books always seem to be my favorites. Shows such as Maurice Sendak's Seven Little Monsters and Little Bear, Clifford the Big Red Dog, and of course, Arthur. Arthur taught kids about various social situations, among other things as well. One of them being about cancer and the Great McGrady, and then one about Asperger's syndrome, and dealing with scary situations, such as when the school was on fire, and everyone had different feelings about the issue. I loved reading the Arthur books as a kid, and plenty more including the books like Clifford, Little Bear, and many more children's books. Again, I'm not a huge bookworm unless it's a manga or a comic, but any book that interests me is a book I'm more than happy to read. And Arthur was one of those book shows I loved more than anything, and would watch it religiously whenever it aired on PBS. Bear in the Big Blue House. Back in the day, Disney Junior was originally called Playhouse Disney. A lot of shows were on there such as Rolypoly Oly, PB&J Otter, Out of the Box, and a personal favorite of mine, Bear in the Big Blue House. Like with many others on this list, I watched this religiously on Disney Channel, or on VHS, or even on DVD. It's a show I have fond memories of. The show itself is basically what it is. The host of the show, Bear, introduces the show by the famous phrase, "What's that smell?" And we notice the smell's coming from us, and the show will be introduced by a possible conflict that will be resolved, like other characters arguing, or doing something related to the topic of the show, like refusing to share, and the problem will be resolved, and then the topic will be talked about via a special word, and Bear would explain it. The show had other characters like Ojo, a bear cub, Trilo the lemur, Tutter the blue mouse, Pip and Pop Otter, Shadow, a shadow, and many other characters as well, including Luna, the moon. The show would end with Bear talking to Luna, and them singing the goodbye song, and Bear saying we'd hope to come over again, and to see him again in the next episode. Salia's show ended around the early to mid-2000s, with the death of Lynn Thigpen, the voice of Luna, at the age of 53. She passed away in 2003 due to a cerebral hemorrhage. We'll never forget you, Luna. Zaboomafoo. I was going to put Stanley on this entry, but Zaboomafoo won that coin toss. Ever since I was little, I loved animals, and had an infectious love for animals, mostly because my family had dogs and I grew up around them. Zaboomafoo was one of my favorite shows when it came to learning about animals, alongside Stanley. Basically, the show is about the Crab Brothers, who are animal experts, and have their own show on PBS, Wildcrats. And they teach kids about animals along with Zaboomafoo, who was a lemur. And lemurs are freaking cool and super cute! I had at least one VHS tape of Zaboomafoo as a kid about baby animals, and I watched it as many times as I could. And this is kind of where my love for animals came from. So thank you, Zaboomafoo and the Crab Brothers, for making me the animal lover I am today. Stanley. Had to put it on this list somehow. The Playhouse Disney show kind of plays off like Zaboomafoo, but except without a lemur as a co-host of the cartoon. It's about a kid who has a great big book of everything about animals, and depending on the theme of the show, Stanley learns about certain animals with his friends and pets, and all I remember was the fish's name was Dennis. Yeah. And the Great Big Book of Everything song. I think Stanley and Zaboomafoo made me interested in becoming a veterinarian one day, but as I got older, I realized I wasn't smart enough to be a vet, and was always worried about accidentally hurting the animals by making everything worse. Plus, med school bills are very expensive, and I wouldn't have the money or time for vet school. But thanks to Stanley as well for making me an animal lover. The Big Comfy Couch. I remember having 2 VHS tapes of this show. Basically, the show is about clowns, a clown girl named Lunetta, and her doll Molly. The show basically revolves around them solving everyday problems and having little exercising segments throughout the show, like stretching, dancing, fun little things like that. I did go back and watch a few episodes in the past, and nowadays, I'm not necessarily scared of clowns, but I do find them a little unsettling. But I think Pennywise and other creepy, scary, spoopy clowns kind of ruined it for me. But I always have the Big Comfy Couch to comfort me in case I need a reminder that not all clowns are scary. The Animaniacs. It's time for Animaniacs, and they're zany to the max. I would watch whenever it was on either Nicktoons Network or on other programs like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, or even The Hub in later years. I remember watching a few episodes of the show and owning at least one VHS tape of it, but I think the segments of the show that really got me to remember it was not only the Warner Brothers and Warner's sister, but the Side Squirrel segments and Pinky and the Brain. Honestly, this show is a definite one of the highlights of anyone's childhood who grew up watching the show. Tiny Toon Adventures. They're tiny, they're toony, they're all a little loony, and they're like the next gen of Looney Tunes. In a way. These toons study at the Acme University and are taught by the Looney Tunes about being comedic and above all loony. Similar to the Animaniacs, these shows had segments surrounding the characters, and is one of Spielberg's magnum opus alongside Animaniacs. Plus, the characters in the show are super adorable. I remember seeing this show either on Nicktoons Network, or I think Cartoon Network. The only thing I remember the most is watching the episodes on TV. And this is one of my favorite Looney Tunes spin-offs alongside Baby Looney Tunes. And no, unfortunately, Baby Looney Tunes isn't going to appear on this list. Sorry guys if you were expecting it. Dexters Lab, the show that came before Jimmy Neutron. Dexters Lab was a weird one. The show is about a boy genius with a secret lab that only the sister Dee Dee knew about. And this is basically a show about a young boy genius and his sister ruining and destroying everything in her path. And the parents being clueless about Dexter's Lab, because it's a secret of course, and just being a regular mom and dad. Also, there was an enemy known as Mandark, so yeah, he was Dexter's rival. The show is a little ahead of its time, but was Cartoon Network's Jimmy Neutron before Jimmy Neutron aired. Speaking of which, Jimmy Neutron, the Nick version of Dexter's Lab, except with a twist. The movie of the same name, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, was basically a practical pilot to the future series, The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron, or The New Adventures of Jimmy Neutron. I think there was another pilot involving the show, but the one with the evil Yokians was a more updated one that inspired the movie. Plus, the show was super cool, and even Jimmy was a boy genius like Dexter. But if those two shows taught us anything, it's that, as a wise scientist once said, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, as well as cause and effect. Yeah, that probably didn't make any sense, but I think season 1 of Jimmy Neutron was the best out of the future seasons that aired. While there were some good ones in the newer seasons, I feel like the first season had the best episodes out of all of them. My Life as a Teenage Robot. My Life as a Teenage Robot was a unique one. The show revolves around the teenage robot XJ9, aka Jenny Wakeman, going through life as a normal teenager. Well, somewhat normal if you're a teenage robot, and your mom is a retired government scientist. Other than being a somewhat normal teen, Jenny has a job to save the world from destruction, similar to the Powerpuff Girls, but only from a place called the Cluster Prime, and defeat evildoers like Vexus and Smitus, for example. Plus, the show had similar style to those old-timey cartoons like Betty Boop, and the art style worked with the show very well. While the show was a forgotten treasure, being redug and remastered by some, there's hopefully some life for a reboot. Let's hope it won't turn into the Powerpuff Girls 2016 reboot. Speaking of robots... Rolypoly Oly, another preschool show from Playhouse Disney. This show is another unique one. Alongside other Playhouse Disney shows like Bear and Stanley, this was one of my favorites. It's basically about a family of robots, with two of the main characters, Oly and his sister Zoe, going through everyday life in the eyes of a child, along with their friends throughout the show, showing what life is like for a kid. Even though I don't have much to say about the show, it was one of my favorites. Heck, I even remember having a recorded VeggieTales tape of some of the episodes alongside Bear in the Big Blue House. I rewatched some of the episodes a while back for this video, and I feel like this show still holds up today, like how it was back then. Chowder. Again, a unique, yet also very weird show. Chowder is basically about a boy named... Chowder, whom is a chef's apprentice by Mung Doll with his wife, Truffles, voiced by the amazing Tara Strong, and his assistant, Schnitzel. The best way I can describe the show is... well, interesting. There are characters like Panini, who's a stalker / love interest to Chowder, but Chowder has no interest, and I'll just saying his classic phrase whenever Panini is around, "I'm not your boyfriend!" And also what Panini does in the show is kind of borderline or straight up harassment to show how much thirst Panini has, and sometimes I feel like she's committing an illegal. And there's Gorgonzola, who's Chowder's rival and bully, but Chowder either dismisses Gorgonzola's meanness or just destroys him with kindness. And there are other characters like Despacho, who is actually super funny and really cool. Plus, I feel like this show is what got me into both things I love so much: baking and cooking, and drawing. I count baking and cooking as one. Both creative form of art that I hope one or both of them can lead to a professional career in my future. Maybe. Codename Kids Next Door. Another weird one, but a show a lot of us can relate to as children. This was another personal favorite of mine from Cartoon Network. The show revolves around kids who are undercover spy kids, stopping adult tyranny, and the overruling of adulthood to fight for the rights of children. Kind of what like real life is today. Some of the villains like Nightbrace, Father, Mr. Boss, and many more were all actually pretty creative. Though I do remember a convo with a few of my Discord friends about the K&D villains being childhood fears we all had as kids, such as Nightbrace being the fear of dentists, and Father being a fear of angry and overbearing parents, for example, and Grandmother Stuffums being Grandma's cooking, if your grandma was a bad cook, and or school cafeteria food. But the Toilinator was always a hilarious one for us. I even made a joke about him being the fear of toilet training if you were a very little kid who refused to graduate out of diapers. But the delightful children were always creepy. I feel like the creators got the inspiration with The Shining for these characters. Plus, they're weird. Too weird even for me. They collected toenails, for crying out loud. Gross! But still, the show was amazing during that time. Heck, I watched whenever it was on Cartoon Network as much as possible, or as much as I could on air, or the Sand Sister Network Boomerang. The Nicktoons network of CN. Definitely a show I look back on fondly during those moments. Teen Titans. When there's trouble, you know who to call. The OG Teen Titans. Long before the horrific, ungodly reboot of Teen Titans Go, Teen Titans was kinda interesting. In a way. It was an anime, but it wasn't at the same time, I guess. Some aspects of it show it off as an anime, but in others it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Still, Teen Titans was one of my favorites on the CN. And a few of my favorite characters in the show were Beast Boy, Raven, and Starfire. I feel like all three of them are my spirit animal. Don't get me wrong, I love Cyborg and Robin, but Raven, Beast Boy, and Starfire were my three main favorites. Plus, the episodes were amazing. I think 2 or 3 of my favorites were the ones with Starfire being Silky's mom, and the Mother May I episode. Those are the 2 I can remember at the top of my head. So, if you're looking for something that isn't Teen Titans Go, go to the OG Teen Titans. Hamtaro. Hi! Hamtaro is one of my favorites aside from Pokemon and Kimba. Hamtaro is about this adorable little hamster of the same name who moves into a new place with his owner, Laura, and goes on various adventures throughout the show. Sadly, it ended and stopped airing on March 31st, 2006, due to the VA cast of the English dub not wanting to dub the anime anymore, and the crazy plots of some of the episodes, and the show receiving poor ratings. Hopefully someday we'll be able to get some unreleased and fan dub episodes in the future. Plus, Hamtaro was freaking adorable! Believe it or not, I still have my old Hamtaro plushie and DVDs, and even a DS game. May not have a lot of merch, but I am a huge Ham fan. Ed, Edd and Eddy. Yet again, this was one of the other unique shows of childhood. Mine, and anyone else who grew up with the show. The cartoon is about the 2000 generation of the Three Stooges. Eddy the scammer, Double D the brains, and Ed... Just Ed. Ed is another one of my spirit animals. The Eds basically try to come up with outrageous scams to get quarters for jawbreakers. Honestly, while this show was weird in its own way, it was hilarious and awesome. That's honestly all I can say on it. Weird, awesome, hilarious, and Ed is my spirit animal. The Wild Thornberrys. While I barely remember this show, this was another one that turned me into a huge animal lover. With the now memeable Nigel Thornberry, voiced by veteran actor and VA Tim Curry. The entire show being about animals, adding in some animal knowledge without it being too in your face. The girl, Eliza, being able to talk to animals and help out with whatever problems they have. I, too, believe that I have the power to speak to animals. I didn't. Again, even though I don't remember the show very much, it's still a big part of my life. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. A dark cartoon in my life. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy had a different impact on my life. Involving dark humor, love for monsters before Monster High, and a love for gothic culture and everything goth. Though my family banned this show from my life as a child because they believed Mandy was a bad influence. That was her freaking character to be a snarky, bitchy, and child dictator. Watch someone take that last one out of context. Later in middle and high school, I rebelled by watching the show again on YouTube and on free web streaming sites. Granted, the show seemed to be ahead of its time, but I enjoyed it a lot. Cream was by far my absolute favorite character in the entire show. A cool Jamaican accent, a skeleton with a bit of the soft side, pretty much a skeleton version of Aku Aku from Crash, and overall funny and hilarious. Hells to the yeah! Invader Zim. Yet another dark one with dark humor, but in a different way. Invader Zim was the one that embraced my true weirdness, and inner goth girl as a child growing up. Kerr was another one of my spirit animals. The show knew how to do comedy like how The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy did, but it was like The Grim Adventures if Nick bought Grim Adventures instead of Invader Zim. Zim was an adorable, evil little goofball, and Richard Horvath, the same voice of Billy and many more, knew how to make a super funny character, and knew how to make Zim funny, and knew how to get kids like me to laugh. when it came to characters like Zim. Also, I think the show had a bigger impact on me than I realized. I love this show. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Ever wonder where our old imaginary friends go when we outgrow them? Easy! Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. The show revolves around Mac and his friend Blue, along with some other characters like Wild, Eduardo, Coco, and many more, going on misadventures and just going through their day-to-day lives. Coco and Cheese were always my favorites. And Goo too. The show also had a bit of a unique art style to it. The line art drawn is more like crayon or colored pencil in a way. Plus the show was one of Cartoon Network's most memorable, along with the last 5 on this list. VeggieTales. Growing up in a Christian household, VeggieTales was a must-have in any Christian-related childhood. I watched the show religiously, no pun intended, day in, day out, all day or night long. Even today, I look back on some of the episodes to watch for nostalgic purposes, and to relive some happier times in my life. While I am an agnostic adult now, VeggieTales always shines some light on my day, whenever I need it the most. Sonic X. Cliche, I know, but hear me out. Granted, I didn't get too big into Sonic until high school, but I remember seeing a few episodes of Sonic X in my youth when the Sonic fandom became... yeah, but hey, I still like it. My main favorite characters were Cream, Amy, Tails, Rouge, and Knuckles. Not much else to say other than that. The Powerpuff Girls. You probably saw this coming. The Powerpuff Girls has been a major favorite show on the CN ever since I saw whatever first episode I watched. I even had some of the VHS tapes, and I always found myself kin to Bubbles, since she was my favorite. I've been told that I'm basically like the true embodiment of Bubbles, and my dad was Mojo Jojo, mainly because he was a monkey with a funny accent, and he loved Mojo Jojo. Basically one of my all-time favorite Cartoon Network classics to this day too. Even today, I'm still just like Bubbles. Rugrats. A classic Nicktoon that's been my favorite just as much as the Powerpuff Girls was. Rugrats is basically a what-if scenario. If babies could talk, what would they say and how would they see the world? The show is extremely unique that way, and even had a trilogy of movies, one of which was a crossover between another show created by the Klatskalewski Company, The Wild Thornberrys. Though sadly, the show is only second favorite to the next entry on this list, but it's still my favorite, and that is... Blue's Clues. This was a show I loved watching, even as an adult. The show revolves around the puppy, Blue, leaving clues for her owner, Steve or Joe, depending on what season you watched, to find and figure out what you wanted to do, or something that revolved around the show. Though, I spoke about this many times before, but Steve always had this special magic that he took with him when his time on the show ended, with Joe as the new host. Joe seemed to be missing that spark, for me at least. But A for effort, credit where credit is due. But Steve will always be the main man behind finding those clues Blue always left. Plus, the show taught me a lot of valuable lessons I'd use later in my adulthood. Honestly, this show had a larger impact on me than all the other shows listed on here. But they're all my favorites regardless. Plus doggos. Whew! That was a lot to go through. Was gonna do some honorable mentions, but I may or may not leave those either in the description or in a pinned comment, because this video is long enough already. That being said, comment your favorite nostalgic show in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one, pups. Cue the outro. I'm gonna take a nap. Peace.